We are recording, just so everyone's aware. Hello again, Peter Anderson.
So I just want to make sure I grab the right one instead.
All right, I'm sure people are going to trickle in, but let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining in, and it's again so nice to see so many people whose at least Twitter handles I know, if not their names. I was going to share my screen, but I don't think I'm gonna. Maybe I will, so you can see the web address. If you do miss a session, or if you want to revisit a session you attend, there is a website where I've been putting the recordings of these sessions, and then there's a little bit of information too you can see on those tabs, but mostly the most recent recording will go on the front page, and any of the other ones will get archived. And then if any resources spill out of these that people who are in attendance want to share, or the presenters, I don't want to say presenters, the key contributors want to share, I can put that up there too. I'm not much of a website guy, I'm using a free service, but I'll do my best to get it up there. So it's just tinyurl.com/BTC practice sharing. And then of course we've got tonight's 3 key contributors up there. And the last thing I will say is it looks like December 15th is going to be the next one. So that's 12 days from now. And it's going to be Jamie DePippo and Alicia Burtis, and they're just going to talk on tasks alone. That's such a fun topic. And so keep your eyes peeled for that. I'll have more in the spirit of sharing and gift giving, depending on tasks. It might be everyone brings their favorite task, or everyone brings a task that you just something that people can share if people are interested, but I'll figure all that out later and make an announcement. I don't want to take up any more time, so I don't know how the 3 of you have it worked out between yourselves, but I'll let you take it from here.
All right, I'll take it. I'll take the lead here. I'm going to share the screen. My name is Michael Pruner, and I should be better at Zoom than I am demonstrating right now. Let's see a second here. Hold on. Oh my goodness. Present, and then share, and then screen 2, and then share. All right, there we are. That's us. Welcome everybody. Thanks, Will, for organizing this. I think that's such a cool thing that what you've done, and I think it's also such a neat opportunity to get a group of teachers together from all over, I presume, North America. This is such a neat opportunity to talk about thinking classrooms. I'd like to get things started just by introducing ourselves, and I'll start with me, and then Kirsten and Kevin will introduce themselves as well. My name is Michael Pruner, and my email and my Twitter handle is up there. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me afterwards, feel free to do so. I'm a high school mathematics teacher. I'm currently teaching a grade 12 math course and a grade 11 math course. We are in the COVID world teaching in a quadmester system where we see our classes for almost 3 hours each day. And that's my dog, Finn. Welcome, Finn. And I've been teaching for a significant amount of time. I started teaching using a version of Thinking Classrooms probably around 2014 or 2015 after attending one of Peter Liljedahl's teacher leadership sessions. And I've been modifying it and tweaking it ever since then. And I'm proud to say that I can't imagine using any other model for teaching right now. And I'm happy to share some of the ideas tonight with everybody here. So I'll pass that on to Kirsten or Kevin to introduce themselves.
Okay, maybe I'll go next. I can't see Kevin on my screen right now. So I'm Kirsten Dyck. I teach in Saskatchewan. I teach in a small town school just outside of Saskatoon. We're a grade 7 to 12 high school, and I get to teach middle years math. And also for part of my role, I get to support teachers across my school division, mostly with K to 8, but kind of throughout the K to 12 area. And I have not been using the Thinking Classroom framework as long as Michael has. I was I'm in a small town, so I've taught a lot of different subjects and a lot of different grade levels. And it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I moved back into the math classroom. Hadn't been there for a long time. And I literally just kind of Googled, how are people teaching math now? And tried to start implementing a few different things. And I was using horizontal whiteboards and lots of group works, and sometimes random and sometimes not. And after I heard Peter's first presentation when he came out to Saskatchewan, the next day I was like, oh, I guess we're going to move the whiteboards up to the wall. So I don't want to diminish the significance of what that presentation was, but I feel like I was kind of maybe on a journey that I didn't know I was on, and it was a really good fit for me. So that's who I am. And off to Kevin.
Hello, my name is Kevin Cumming, and I teach in the same school division as Kirsten. I teach in a different small town across the river, as most people would say, about 30 kilometers. I don't know what that is in miles for the Americans, but 30 kilometers away from Saskatoon. I've been teaching for almost 18, 19 years, I think. And I started with the thinking classroom about 2 or 3 years ago when I first went to a presentation by Peter as well. And like Kirsten, it was kind of the next day I was like, okay, I'm going to be doing this now, because all of my frustrations and all the things I had always been wondering about teaching math and all the things that weren't happening that I wish were happening, all of a sudden all these doors started opening in my brain. I'm like, oh, we could do this instead. And I can check all those boxes that were really frustrating me as a math teacher. And like Kirsten, I'm lucky that we're face-to-face right now. We keep on hearing that we may not always be face-to-face in the next coming weeks. So as long as we are face-to-face, I've been able to apply a lot of these things still to my classroom and not have to go to a distance version of this. So I consider myself lucky. And that is my intro. So am I up first, Michael? Oh. Peter.
Did Michael just drop entirely?
Michael has been telling me, because I was in a separate meeting with him today, that he's got this hot and cold
Okay.
Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi where he is, and his son is doing an online course. And,
All right.
well, I think the answer to your question is yes.
Okay, so I am here. I'm going to start by talking about forming groups. And
Want me to see if I can pull up the slideshow?
yeah, if you can pull it up, if I'm going to start with the group thing. And I'm going to kind of start from the beginning if you have never used a thinking classroom before. Forming groups before March, normally I would use the deck of cards that Peter talks about in the book, and make sure I have, groups of 3 cards. Around my classroom, I do have on the boards, and you'll see some pictures of my classroom later on. Around the boards, everything's clearly labeled. If you get an ace, you're over here. If you get a 7, you're over here. So the students, after getting their cards, know where they're going to do their work. There we go.
I just have to figure out how to present. Oh, there's the button.
Hey, I'm back. I'm so sorry,
Okay.
folks. Oh my goodness.
Nothing spells 2020.
Oh,
dropping
so
when
much
you're
so. It
presenting.
seems like you guys are flying without me, so I'll just sit back for a bit.
Okay. In this COVID time, we can't really do the cards. So I believe these are Kirsten's popsicle stick method, possibly. Okay.
Yep, those are mine. Yeah.
I use just an app called TeamShake. If you've ever used it on the App Store. For Apple, it's I think like $2.79. But I can put this is just from the App Store itself. What you can do is just put all your students' name in there. Along the right, you can you can just say whether they're present or not that day. So if you have a number of students that are missing, you just take them off the list just temporarily. And you give your phone a shake, and it creates random lists. And so usually I'll get a student to ask to tell me how many times they want me to shake it. So if I shake it 3 times, they can see it change every time that I'm shaking that phone. And those are the groups that we're left with that day. So I have it set up, depending on how many students are in the class, that we will get groups of 3 or 2, because that is ideal in a thinking classroom. With younger students, I know Peter talks about in his book, I don't teach younger students. I teach grade 9 to 12 math. Peter does recommend 2 per group, and I believe it's our school is K to 12, so I do spend some time with the little people in our building. I believe communication might be a little iffy if there's three students all trying to get their point across when they're little like that. But someone could correct me on that. I have at times had my group set up really nice with groups of 3, and then a student or 2 walks in 10 minutes late. They just came from an appointment of some sort. And then you're usually tempted to make a group of 4. And then after you do that a few times, you realize things devolve rather quickly. When that 4th person moves into that group, the flow of the group is usually not so great anymore. So you would then usually make 2 groups of 2 or whatnot. But that group of 4 is something I generally try and stay away from. The groups of 3 are also great for diversity of thought. With only 2 students, you don't get a whole lot of diversity. You get a little bit. 3 students is really ideal because they can grab ideas from each other. They can run with ideas from each other as well. I think if we're talking about forming groups, sometimes there's like some issues with, you might have classroom drama with certain students in your classes. For me, being in a small K to 12 school, we only have 1 grade 9 class. We only have 1 grade 10 class. We only have 1 grade 11 class. And I am the math department. So a student that sees me in grade 9 will see me for both maths that they take in grade 10. They usually take 2 maths in grade 11 and then another 2 in grade 12. So the danger is that when they come to me, sometimes they do have these established roles. So putting them into random groups is kind of hard for them to get their head around, but this person always does all the math, and I know that they know it. And so if I have an idea, I'm a little less hesitant to give my idea to the group. So it takes a little while for that culture to build, but they eventually do get there. But they've been together from kindergarten through grade 9. And so there are some kind of entrenched roles that they find themselves in. And so it's a little bit different than if I get a fresh group of students at the beginning of a semester. We may get students transferring into the school, but generally it's a pretty static group. The other one that usually comes up when talking about these random groups would be students with anxiety. And I do have some students that have some pretty high anxiety levels. And sometimes I can use the groups to help them get more comfortable. And sometimes they are just not very comfortable, and that's just where they're at for that day, or it might be for that week. And that's okay. So I'll find other ways to support them. I do like some of the prompts that Peter has gone over in his presentations. The one where I need you to go over to that group over there and tell me one thing that they're doing. You can come back and report it to me. Tell me one thing that they're doing to solve this problem, one big thing. I find that allows them to just kind of be the fly on the wall, kind of hanging around and when kids are engaged in a task, they don't really know if there's a student kind of watching them from afar. They're really into that task. So just getting them closer to other groups. I have had some success where I just need you to go sit by that group. And while they're working, you can, and if you feel like you want to hop in there, go ahead. And one day I did catch one of my really high anxiety kids grabbing a marker up at the board. I was able to quickly take a picture for that 3 minutes and send that to the parents and let them know that, hey, today your daughter was participating in the groups and it was really good for her, that sort of thing. So those are always kind of issues with the forming of groups. You always have those questions, but knowing that the randomness of the groups is key, you can fight through that. And it really is great for kids when they can find that success working with people that maybe they don't normally work with, and realizing that they can all contribute, even if it's in some little way, and they can all learn that way. So that is my spiel, my general spiel on forming groups.
I'd like to echo a little bit of what you said there, Kevin. Thank you. I would agree that anxiety is usually the issue that students raise when they are here at your randomizing groups every day. Almost every year, I get a few students sticking around after class saying, hey, wait a minute, or I'll get a counselor coming up after class saying, hey, I spoke to a few of your students. And 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100, I just say to the counselor or the students that, just give it a try for a couple of weeks. We all have things that we're strong with and things that we're worried about. Just give it a try for a few weeks, and the majority of times it just disappears. Because they start to see how normal this is, and they trust that it is a randomized process, that they're not actually being grouped with students because of their ability or because of their behavior. So 99 times out of 100, the problems all just disappear. I have had in the years playing with this, I have had 1 or 2 times where I have had to adapt the process a little bit for some students. But I mean, we're all professionals and we find ways to adapt when absolutely necessary. But the majority of the time, the problems just disappear. And I wrote on there that this is, in my opinion, this is probably the most powerful thing. And I think I've lost my connection. Have I lost my connection?
Nope.
Oh, you're all so still.
So you're enrapturing, Michael.
I think this is the most powerful influence in a thinking classroom. Every year, at the end of a year, when I'm doing thinking classrooms, I poll my students and I say, what did you think? Vertical surfaces, randomized groups, tasks, all that stuff. And almost everybody provides feedback about how impressed they were about the randomized groups. My grade 12 students will say things like, I got to know students that I've been going to school with since kindergarten that I've never really gotten to know until your class in grade 12. And to me, that's like so profound and such a positive thing to hear students actually putting words together like that. It's a pretty powerful thing. So if you're not going to do anything about thinking classrooms, at the very least, you should be randomizing your groups every day.
Totally agree.
Yeah. And I know with the COVID restrictions, because we're face-to-face, there's some hiccups around that right now. So for my classroom, my admin has suggested we keep the same groups for the full week. So I randomize on Friday so that everything can be sanitized for their new spaces to be on Monday when they arrive in the classroom. And I know Peter talks about in the book about how those group roles can often kind of become entrenched. And that is something I'm really seeing this year. By Friday, those kids, they need a change. And because the last couple of years I've been using random groups every single day, I'm absolutely noticing that this year that they default into those roles after they've had a couple of days with the same group of people. So I'm looking forward to when I can randomize daily again.
Right.
Now, Michael, I don't know if you wanted to go back to sharing the screen or I see that there were things happening in the chat, but I couldn't read the chat. So I thought maybe it was more comfortable for us to just have this part of the conversation and go back. I don't know, it doesn't matter.
I was thinking only that, I mean, I always like to start off these group collaboration opportunities with tasks. And I don't know, when I was in cyberspace lost and flying in with the bits and the bytes out there, did you guys get to see some of the tasks at the beginning?
No, we didn't want to take that away from you because
okay.
we're so excited about it.
Well, then let me share a couple of tasks just so we can have something to chew on. And then Kirsten, you can go on it and share your idea about room arrangement. So let's see if I can do this here. Okay, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to say this, and then I am going to do this. And we should be back in business. Here we are. So I'm going to go back a little bit, just really quickly. I wanted to share, because part of what we're talking about today is tasks in thinking classrooms. And I just wanted to share very briefly a couple of my favorite tasks. This one comes from Enrich. Some of you may have seen it before. I have since not been able to re-find it. So this is just going from memory. These are 12 nodes that we have to connect with wires. Our job is to connect opposite nodes. And there's a couple of constraints. One of them is that wires cannot cross. And the other constraint is that as we connect wires going along the outside of the dots, we can never have more than 2 wires going parallel outside of the dots. I'm not going to give us time to work on this. I don't think that's the point of our little get together today. I just wanted to share this task for maybe you to scribble in your margin and try and figure things out on your own if you haven't seen it already. I also wanted to share it because for me, this task is a great task for students to develop perseverance in. Every year that I give this task, it has never been solved in a single class. It has always taken 2 classes, sometimes 3 classes, before somebody gets this light bulb of an idea and they're able to solve it. So I love this task as an opportunity for students to see that math isn't always solved in 5 minutes or 6 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever you usually give them. That sometimes you have to stew on problems and sometimes you have to struggle with problems. And for me, this has been a great task for that. Another favorite task of mine is this one that I just stumbled across this year. I'm sure you've all seen it a million times, but it's how many squares. Usually it's a chessboard, but this is different intentionally. It's not a chessboard, it's a dot array, 5x5 dot array, and students are to count the squares. And the reason why this is my favorite is because this is one where within a class or within a 20 or 15 minute opportunity with the students playing with it, you actually get to see light bulbs. You know what I mean? Like that, oh, did I lose you? Will, can you nod? Are you still alive? Okay, you are good. I'm so paranoid. You actually get to see those light bulb moments with students. I'm not sure if you've played with this before. If you have, then you might be able to identify with what I'm talking about right now. Like this really is a task where students go, oh my goodness, aha, I get it. So it's a fun one for that. And so again, it's for the ADD people out there who maybe aren't able to pay attention to our discussion right now. You can play with these ones on your own on a scrap piece of paper. Maybe in the chat room, you can participate a little bit. But that's what I wanted to start with. And then of course, this is what we're talking about today. And we just began the conversation with Kevin talking about forming groups. So we're also going to be looking at furniture and types of tasks. Kirsten, would you like me to unshare?
Oh, no, you can just keep sharing and I'll just start talking.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know when to click a button. So do one of these when to click the button.
Yeah, okay. I saw there was a question in the chat. So we'll just pause this slide. Somebody was asking about identity and culture building at the beginning of the year. So if people have some ideas to share or put in the chat, that would be great. If people want to unmute, if they want to speak to that for a second. Depending on how far along people are, if they've read the book or heard Peter or experimented with some of this in their classroom, I think the idea of doing some of those non-curricular tasks at the beginning is a really important piece of that culture building, and having the students develop that perseverance, develop that ability to have that collaborative work environment, knowing that the mathematical discourse is important in the classroom, and just being able to see themselves as mathematicians, and that how they enter the room as humans they're there for first and foremost as people before they become our students. So for me, that's really important when we start our year together and our time together as a group. But if other people have things that they would like to share to help answer that question, and I'm not sure if I've interpreted the question right either. So if somebody wants to help me out on that, that would be great. I'm just trying to scroll up in the chat here a little bit. So I will try to give adequate wait time on a Zoom call, but I also know that that can feel extra painful. So. Okay, so we'll just maybe skip ahead, and if people have things to add, we'll skip back if we need to. So furniture and room arrangement. Kind of the main ideas for this is how can we defront the classroom so that there's not really a space that becomes the teacher's space versus the student space, providing space for students to be able to move around, and how do we break those norms? Peter mentions in his book, and I always feel bad when I'm trying to talk about his book when he's right here and could speak to that himself, but how even as teachers, when we move into a professional development and we walk into a room, we have an idea of what's going to happen that day. And so what are some of those norms that the students have when they walk into the classroom? And this picture makes me chuckle because you can tell I teach students in the middle year grades because they are all totally different heights. Just that's how they go. So what are the norms that we have in our room, and how do we help break that for students? So Michael, if you want to just flip to the next slide. this one is a picture of some grade 3 students, so that in their thinking classroom, they have lots of space to move. And this problem that day took them right down to the floor to be able to work together. And they were working in either groups of 2 or 3. So I think grade 3 is kind of on that cusp of being able to collaborate. And this was a group that had worked together in a thinking classroom framework for most of the year. And if you click again, we'll see that their boards were vertical, but they also moved some of those things down to the floor, that they were busy working on the floor, and they were doing some tasks of figuring out how many sticky notes were going to cover the tiles in their room. And so they had moved their boards down to the floor. So the room arrangement can be very, very flexible, even depending on the grade level. So when we look to the next slide, this is just a picture of my classroom in March. The room I teach in was built in the 1950s, so it is not very large, but I have all sorts of desks and tables and stand-up desks, and it never really looked the same at the end of one day compared to another. For a while, we had a caretaker in our room who was adamant that the desks belonged in rows because it made it easier for him to sweep. You always want to have the caretaker on your side. So the last 30 seconds of every class was like, okay, kids, desks back. And it did not take very long at all for us to put the desks back into the rows where they belonged. But if you notice here, Michael will click one more time, that we have desks that I took this picture from the quote unquote front of the room, and I have literally desks that face the opposite direction because the students know that there's not much that I do at the front that is important for them to watch. So the desks can just go anywhere. So that was what it looked like last spring. And the next slide will show that this is the front board this year. I have a smart board up there. I write in a red marker, so the students are the ones who are doing the work. And the next click will show you that we are spaced in rows. The kids have their own bucket of supplies. That's where we keep their own markers and their own erasers. They have individual whiteboards because for a while we weren't even sure whether we would be allowed to be at the vertical boards or not. I have that whole row of cupboards. So I have some portable whiteboards that get used over there, but that's what my room looks like. So the desks are in rows, but I have spaces for the kids to be able to work at the board. So it's not the setup that I would like, but it's the setup that I have right now because of COVID. So part of the safety plan within our school division, you can move ahead, Michael, that's fine, is that I have some tape on the floor of where kids are supposed to stand so that they can maintain distance. I know some teachers have actually found the kids can be further apart with the tape around the floor. We've also had conversations about the directionality of breath. That was never anything we thought we would need. We are fully masked all of the time, all day at school. So if the kids are facing the board, it's some ways actually better than talking to each other and breathing on each other. And Michael will show you from the next slide that as much as I try to keep the kids apart, that doesn't always happen. For a while, I put desks in between the kids that were at the board and the other ones, and they were literally climbing over top of the desks to try to get to the board to be able to write. So, so they don't always stay apart as much as we would like, but we are masked and have some other layers of protection. So that's kind of how we have adapted things for COVID. But going back to what we would like to see is that room for students, breaking of those norms. So when Michael moves to the next slide, we'll get to see Kevin's room. So I'll let Kevin speak to that if he would like to.
Sure, yeah. On March 19th was the day that we went home and did not return until September. And so this is kind of the way my room, on the top picture is the way my room kind of ended up at the end of the year. I had, I believe, around 9 or 10 kind of big tables and kind of just always had them piled up in the middle of the room. And then as we broke up into our group, it allowed for a massive amount of space for kids to move from group to group. And when they were done, if they needed to work on their the rest of their questions, they would just pull a table out and work it from there and grab a chair and go from there. But when I think it was in a different chat where someone mentioned that they liked the fact that I had so many whiteboards. And my response to it did take me 15 years of asking for nothing in order for me to then go for my big ask. I didn't know what it was going to be, but it was like to replace the bulletin boards that were in the back with whiteboards. And so a funny story, and Peter may not even know this, like right after his first presentation in our school division, everybody went and put in these orders for whiteboards. And we got an email from the division office staff that says, we cannot afford for everybody to get permanent whiteboards put in their room. But I was lucky enough that I got these 3 big whiteboards that I was able to put in my room. You can see there's a standing desk there. That is one I'm actually currently at now at home. Because now this picture was taken yesterday. The bottom picture, that's kind of what those desks look like now. We have rules that we must be forward facing. So students can't work face to face, but they can work side by side because there's actually no other space for them to be. And my biggest class is 32. My smallest is 8. So in the course of a day, the kids, when there's 8, they're spread out and they're great. When there's 33, they're kind of all wedged in there, but that's kind of what we're dealing with. And then you can kind of see in the picture, I have the little orange kind of laminated sticky notes that say what group everybody's going to be in that day. And you can also see the standing desk is now gone. I don't have a desk. I've never felt better than not being tied down to one desk. For me, it was a good way to force myself to be up and moving around as well. And so it was a great move to just get rid of the desk altogether. I didn't need it. I used to have filing cabinets, they're all gone. Everything, it's a different room, and I love it that way. So
I think that's a really great point, Kevin. It's something I was going to mention as well. I think that the furniture can have as much of an impact on the students as it can on the teachers.
Yeah.
So I felt the same thing. Is this mine? Yeah, so this is my classroom, literally the week after I first heard Peter speak about thinking classrooms and vertical surfaces and stuff like that. And I was so excited about it. I was actually fortunate enough to already have quite a few whiteboards in my room, but not enough. So in this class of 30, you may see on some desks, I've got some plexiglass that I thought would be a nice kind of interim measure. Before I was able to get full whiteboards around the room, I went down to the admin and said, can I spend $60 down at Home Depot to get some plexiglass? And it was kind of neat at the beginning because I set the plexiglass up on test dividers and students would write on the glass. It felt like really CSI and, San Francisco high tech kind of thing. But very early on, we learned that the vertical plexiglass wasn't working really well because if students were excited, as they often were, the glass would tip over and it would bonk students on the head. So we kept having these incidents where the glass would knock students on the head. So I thought either we need to go horizontal or we have to bring bike helmets to school. And so we ended up moving horizontal. But the point of this story is I was so excited about thinking classrooms that I would invite the admin in to just kind of see what this math classroom looked like. Like all of a sudden, it was just so evident that everybody was so engaged in the mathematics that they were doing. And so it was a great opportunity for admin to see it. And after a few weeks of the admin popping in a couple of times, I set up a meeting with my principal and my vice principal because I had this vision that I wanted different furniture in my room. The desks I found to be too challenging for teenagers to get up and out of. I'm not sure if you've ever noticed that with your own teenagers, but asking them to get up from a seated position is like asking them to cure cancer. Like it's very challenging. So I had this idea that, well, wouldn't it be better to have them in kind of semi-seated tables where, they're standing biased tables where they're, high stools. So I had this idea. I went down to my admin and I had a meeting with them and I presented this vision to my admin. And I remember my vice principal just shaking his head over the whole meeting. And at the end of my sales pitch, he just said, Pruner, this is just too expensive. And I remember my principal turned to him and just said, make it happen. It was amazing. And in about 2 months later, I got these tables that I'm still using to this day. And I just love it because this furniture has, as much as it's changed the culture in my room for my students, it's changed how I teach. I'm not able to fall back into any of my old methods or styles of teaching because I have 10 tables in the room and I have, in some classrooms, I have 3 students at every single table. I mean, there just isn't any space for them to be working independently. This is purely a collaboration space. And as you might be able to judge from this picture, it's so easy to move. Students will, if this was a video, you'll see it. I mean, students will be stuck on one board, and because of the spaces allowing this, they'll wander right across the room without even, you know, paying attention to what they're doing, and get an idea from another board and bring it back to their board. So the furniture in the room is accommodating this this knowledge transfer, this knowledge movement, which is amazing to watch. I'm sorry, I'm pausing because I'm reading comments. I can't speak and read at the same time.
I think there's
Very
only been
linear.
one question, which was, where do they write their assessments? And I know that kind of takes us into a new element, but you know,
Yeah.
it's your question to answer.
Well, that's a whole other workshop. So for me, I only have independent assessing very few times over the course of a year. And on those days that we are doing testing, dividers will go up on the tables, and that takes care of around 20 because I've got 10 tables. And then I will bring in furniture from the staff room and from the library to stuff kids on tables to write an individual assessment. But like I said, it doesn't happen too often. In my view, the independent work is happening all the time when students are at home or outside of the classroom. Like, to me, the classroom is the ideal space for collaborating. So as much as possible, I try and create collaborative opportunities for my students. And like I said, I don't think I would be doing it as much as I'm doing it now if I didn't have this furniture. Like if I had just desks, I think I would fall back to desks and independent work more frequently, but this is kind of forcing me into that. The environment is forcing the teacher as well as the students to be more in a collaborative space.
Yeah. Michael, what's a backpack garage?
Oh yeah, right. I don't know if you can see it in this photo. You can see it. This is actually my old classroom because I just moved schools a couple of years ago. But so I mean, it's a work hazard if kids come in. Okay, for starters, nobody uses lockers anymore in Vancouver. I'm not sure if that's the same around the world, but everybody carries their backpacks with them everywhere, which it wasn't like that when I was going to high school. You'd go to your locker, you'd come to your class with just your books. But nowadays, everybody comes with their backpacks. And it's a hazard. It's actually a workplace hazard because if they put their backpacks on the floor and student A wants to wander across a room to check out another board across the room, they're tripping, or the teacher's tripping. Actually, I have broken 2 Microsoft Surfaces because of tripping over backpacks on the floor. So now it's you can see it at the back of the room. That's the backpack den. So when students come to my class, they drop their backpacks off in the corner of the room, and they come to the tables with nothing. Like, the only thing they have at their tables is them. And then I hand out a pen. And so that's pretty much sets up the class. This is all we're working with today. You have each other and you have a single pen to work with. So, I mean, I don't know that I've paid attention to it as much lately because it's become a norm in my classroom. But now that you pointed it out, I think it's worth mentioning. It definitely is a different environment. Do my students stay at the boards for 2.5 hours? I mean, everything that's good happens at the whiteboards. There definitely is time and space for them to jot down some important items. I think students maybe now probably have notebooks with them more than they used to in my class, but we'll do a task collaboratively at a whiteboard. We will debrief at the whiteboard. Where that's, and you'll see in a moment when we're talking about tasks, that's where I think it's really the teacher's role to do the teaching is at the end. So we debrief at the whiteboard, and then students will breathe in the sense that I send them back to their tables to jot down things that they think were important, and then we go into a new task. So I'd say over 2 hours and 20 minutes, we're probably doing 1 fun task and 3 or 4 content-based tasks over that time. And then there's other assessment things that happen. I mean, we still are doing our other teacher things. So I'll do exit tickets or quick chapter checks or things like that. But that's generally the framework of a classroom. Before we move on to tasks, I'm just wondering if anybody else wants to talk anything more about furniture and arrangement. My dog is chewing on my chair right now, so I'm not sure if that's echoing through to my headphones. But if you're wondering what that noise is, that's him chewing on a chair.
I'll just add one thing about just like trying to defront the classroom. Those tables that you saw, that the picture from yesterday, I turned them all 90 degrees today, and so they were facing like the very small whiteboard. Yeah, right at the very end of the picture, down at the end of the tunnel there. And some of them, like, they walked into the classroom and they were very thrown. Well, where do we sit? Well, you're gonna sit where you're gonna sit, so wherever you want. But they're like, oh, you're gonna teach us on that small little board. And then one other kid said, well, he hasn't taught at the board yet this year. So what makes you think he's gonna teach at that board now? And they're like, oh yeah, I guess that's right. We are doing like our own stuff. And so
like Donald Trump speaking from his tiny desk.
Yeah, from the tiny desk. But like, just it goes to show you that even just the arrangement of the furniture, they now assume the front was moved to the very small board, just because that's where everything was pointing. Mm-hmm. And even though they had experienced the fact that that's not like, I don't teach at one board, I don't live in one space, just the way that your chairs are pointing kind of tells the kids when they walk in the room, this is where the focus is going to be that day. So I can't wait to get rid of the forward facing everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think too, it's interesting when I've had other groups of teachers come to my room to see a math class, that instinctively they stand at the back of the room, and then if that's where they're all clumped together, that's for sure where I'm going to give my task from. And then all of a sudden we've got a swarm of kids at the back of the room, and they don't know what to do because they just think they're going to hide at the back for the day, and that's not how it's going to go. So I think as other adult visitors come into the room, there's just that instinctive feeling of
mm-hmm.
what the classroom should look like and where the front and the back should be. So that whole defronting aspect is really, it's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, these are as much norms for us as they are for our students that are being broken. All right. So I'm gonna finish tonight by talking a little bit about tasks. And as with the other topics, feel free to pop in or write into the chat at any time. Types of tasks was the heading, and I wanted to share some non-curricular task resources right off the bat. I'm sure this page could probably be infinitely large. I'm sure we all have our spaces that we go to get tasks, but I wanted to share a few that I'm familiar with that I go to quite regularly. The very first one is a list that I curated a number of years ago now of tasks that I've been using in my classroom. I title these non-curricular in the sense that these are the fun types of tasks, like the ones I shared at the beginning of this session tonight. And I think there's a really important role that these non-curricular tasks play in a thinking classroom, and we'll touch on that in a moment. But the first one is a bit.ly BCMT tasks. This takes, I hope it will take you to a Word document of a bunch of tasks that I curated over a year of teaching with thinking classrooms a number of years back. The second one is a friend of mine and a recent graduate at SFU, PhD graduate, not Alicia, that's Annette, sorry. Alicia is from Grand Prairie, and she created a book of tasks in her master's program that is actually titled Grade 8, oh gosh, help me out, Peter. Thinking tasks worth, or math worth thinking about. Anyway, you click on it, you'll get there. It's a beautiful book of really rich tasks for kids to play with.
Solving, I think.
Problems worth solving. Thank you so much. Problems worth solving. She's got this title on it though, that it's grade 8. And I think that that's a misnomer. I use it for all of my kids all the way up to grade 12. So I don't think you have to, only use this resource if you're teaching grade 8. Judy Larson and Annette Rouleau both recently graduated with their PhDs at SFU. Judy Larson's website has got a really nice links to a bunch of different tasks. And Annette Rouleau, who currently is at U of A, I believe, she also has a lot of wonderful places to visit and tasks on her website. So I would recommend checking these places out if you are finding yourself short on non-curricular tasks. I believe that non-curricular tasks are as essential in a thinking classroom as content-based tasks. I start off every class with a non-curricular task. like the dot puzzles that I shared at the beginning today, because I think that non-curricular tasks give every student in your classroom an entry point into math. If you're just doing content-based tasks, I think that there are some students that maybe are feeling like they're never really part of the conversation. And if you start a class, if you start every class with a non-curricular task, I think that's a wonderful way to build a culture of a community in your classroom, and to bring these students who typically have had negative experiences in math classrooms. It gives them opportunities to contribute and build their confidence. So, and they're fun. Like I'm sure many of us have played with these already, these types of tasks in your classroom. Like to see in a math classroom, to see kids high-fiving, like that's not normal math teaching experiences. And if you play with these non-curricular tasks, you absolutely get that. You get students high-fiving, you get them cheering, you get them smiling, laughing. And it's a really neat thing to observe in a class. So I would recommend, if you have time, to start every class with a non-curricular task of some sort. I think in Peter's book, he recommends 5 minutes. I find that 5 minutes isn't enough, and maybe I'm discounting the content a little bit too much and overselling these, but I like to spend a good 1/3 of my class on non-curricular tasks. But I think we all have to land wherever we land on this. I think the important thing is to spend time exploring and having a little fun in mathematics. And then the culture that you're building in your classroom, the methods that students are developing in solving these types of tasks, it transfers into the regular content work that eventually you start to share. Yeah, especially with longer classes. Like honestly, I have colleagues that were afraid of moving to 2 hours and 20 minutes. And not me. I mean, I was like, oh, thank God, thank goodness. Finally, we're going to have the time to spend more time on these fun tasks. So it definitely is, I think, more doable in the longer classes. So how about content tasks? So we have non-curricular tasks which serve a purpose, but we still have to teach content. And so where do we get these tasks from? Sometimes I think you can hit a gold mine with just the perfect content-based tasks. And I have an example here. I think it'll pop up next. Yeah, so this is one that I use every year when I'm moving into exponential growth with my grade 9 students, and even with my grade 12s when we're doing exponential functions. I'll throw this task out there. I'm not sure if anybody recognizes this. Do we know what this one's all about? Yeah, I just read the comment. We've got 40 minutes per class. So maybe spend a whole class on non-curricular tasks and then do the next class on content. I don't know, but I mean, I don't think you want to just do non-curricular on Fridays or whatever it might be. I think you have to get into like a regular routine with non-curricular. Does anybody recognize what this task might be, the photo that I have up here? Or is it just me that that has seen this before? No? This is the task for exponential growth, which has students calculate or determine how many times you need to fold a piece of paper in order to get to the moon. Have you heard of it now? Does anybody know the answer? How many times do you need to fold a piece of paper to get to the moon?
This is one of my favorite tasks to give. I love this
Oh
one.
my goodness, right? Like totally content-based, exponential growth. You develop a formula, you get this wow at the end. Does anybody know the answer? It's got a really cool answer too.
I think my son told me he saw something on TikTok, but I don't remember what he told me.
It's 42. It's 42. Yeah, there you go, Peter. Good. Of course, Peter's got it. 42. It's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. 42, which is absolutely amazing. And the picture I have here are some students at MIT. These are high school students. They used to hallway in MIT to get the world record. I think this is 14 folds. Is the record in this picture, which is also amazing. Like if this is 14, we only need to do another 28 folds to get to the moon. So it's an amazing problem, right? If you're going to teach content and you can find a problem like this or a task like this, like, gosh, run with it. So if you can, use the internet and do some searching and find those awesome tasks. But I can tell you that most of the time, I'm not teaching with tasks like that. I'm teaching I'm teaching using non-curricular tasks to build culture and talk about thinking and talk about how I expect my students to work as a class and in their groups. And then when it comes to content, I just use my regular math resources, except I wrote here, turn the math volume down. I get this from Dan Meyer. I attended a workshop that Dan Meyer put on about math, turning the math volume down. And I'm going to give you an example with this in a minute. But I just use my regular resources. And I think that the world that we live in right now, where most of our resources are digital, I'm using on my PC, I use Windows Shift S, which is a way of capturing a bit of the screen on a Windows PC, or on a Mac, you can use Command Shift 5. I think it does the same thing. But the amount of the amount of problems that we can just steal from resources that are already built, it's just amazing. So I've got an example, but I just wanted to talk to these words as well. As much as possible, keeping tasks proscriptive versus prescriptive. This is some vocabulary that I've only recently become aware of. A prescriptive task is a task that tells students what to do. And a proscriptive task is a task that tells students what not to do. So a proscriptive is more desirable because in a proscriptive environment, students can do anything they like. They just can't do this. Okay, so it gives a little bit more freedom. It's more open. Whereas a prescriptive task, which is what I'm about to share with you, is saying, do A, then do B, then do C, then do D, and then do E, and then you're all done, right? There's not really a lot of room for creative thinking and diverse solutions and things like that in a prescriptive environment. So just trying to think of that as you're building your tasks. Try and keep things as open as possible, but you can't keep it too open, because then students don't know what to do at all. You have to put some walls in that playground in order to define the spaces where students can explore. The last little item here is an item called thin slicing content, or thin slicing type tasks. And it's something that I've become more familiar with lately. I believe Alex, if you're here, I think I saw Alex was here from Ottawa. I think you're the one that first kind of got people starting to think about thin slicing. So I will talk about that at the end too. It's not something I do every day, but when I do create tasks that are thin slicing, it's pretty wonderful to watch. So what does a typical task look like if I'm using my math resources? This is from grade 9. I think this was, these photos are from last year, so it's pretty recent. This is the very beginning of a unit in grade 9, representing patterns. This is, I think, day 1 of chapter 5. So what I do is I look through my resources that I already have, and I choose a question that I think captures my learning goal for the day. And so this is the question I have. It's very prescriptive, as I've described already. This is straight out of the textbook. 3 isosceles triangles, each have a perimeter of 25, but their side measurements are different. Step A, make a table of values. Step B, describe the pattern in words. I think we've all seen stuff like this before. Step C, develop an equation. Step D, what is the side length at the base? So you're basically putting your equation to good practice. So this is the task that I found in my class textbook that I like it in a way. I just don't want to present this because I think it takes all the thinking away from my students. So I turn the math volume down and I do something like this. I just say to my students, I'm thinking of an isosceles triangle with a perimeter of 25. I'd like you to draw some pictures and investigate the relationships between the lengths of their sides. All right. So this is stealing a resource question and just turning it into a thinking task. Right. Kids go to the boards and right away they just start drawing triangles all over the boards. And eventually they start narrowing it down and doing tables of values and things like that. I have a picture of one of the groups work here. So this is a picture that was taken at the very end of the task after I've already consolidated the class work. you can't see here because there were literally tons of triangles on the board that they had to erase to make room for their table of values that they built. They eventually did a graph. And then when I came and spoke to their work at the end of the task with the whole class, this is where the teaching happens. And I think this is a critical idea that I'm hoping is not new. It's this idea that as teachers, we're teaching at the end and not at the beginning. Right? Like we have to give our students these tasks that aren't solved, that they get to go and play with. And then at the end, after 20 minutes, that's when the teacher comes in and highlights, the learning goals that maybe I was focusing on for that day. Some of the learning goals that I was focusing on was, first of all, to make sure your graphs don't go in descending order, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. So I made a little note of that. Another thing was to point out the rate of change. And by the way, students intuitively understand rate of change, but to actually draw a connection between rate of change and the coefficient on the x variable, which the students were able to come up with this equation. I was just drawing an arrow to say, hey, look at that, isn't that neat? And then I also took a little bit of time out to talk about discrete and continuous data. So the teaching's happening at the end. My learning goals are hit. I take a photo and this is the evidence of the learning for that particular task. I'm just reading as well, folks, sorry. Yeah, textbooks do have excellent questions. I've been involved in writing textbooks over the years, and it blew me away the amount of work that goes into writing these things. Like it's not just one person sitting in a closet with no windows making questions. It's like they are well-developed resources with lots of teachers reviewing. And yeah. Yeah, and another, just jumping off of Will's comment here, the more you open up a task, the more you expose connections between math concepts. I also noticed that when I'm teaching in this way, that almost every day I'm amazed and wowed by how some students think. Their ways of coming up with solutions. Like it used to be, I was the math expert and I knew the best way to solve a rates problem, and I knew the best way to solve a two-step linear equation. And so I'm going to share that best method with all of my students. And now I'm more of the mind like, holy guacamole, there are some really neat ways to solve that I would never have dreamed of. And I get to see it every day, and I get to celebrate it every day. And it makes my job more rewarding. And it gets to value student work, which is, I think, a pretty important thing to do when you're trying to build students' confidences.
I'm going to jump in for just a minute. One, just to piggyback that, I want to say my favorite is when I give them a task that I haven't yet finished myself, and then they show me how they got the answer, and I just think that's so fun. But the other is we are running down to the last couple minutes, and I do try to be respectful of the time that we commit to. So just a heads up to those of you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that's pretty good timing, actually, when you think that the next slide was the end slide. So we're doing pretty good, except Kirsten and Kevin haven't had an opportunity to speak to task building. I'm not sure if they have something to add.
Just, I'll just go mimic because that's what we're supposed to do, right? I'll just echo what Michael and what people are using. Textbooks, there are great questions in textbooks. You can take out certain parts of them and you can make them into a great thinking task. So textbooks do not equal bad, but they're a great resource. You can just use them in a different sort of way.
Yeah. Just jumping off that, I was in a classroom this morning and there was a great open middle problem that had the kids thinking and experimenting. And this was the first time they had ever been subtracting integers. We discovered there were some great things happening and a few misconceptions, or student understanding was not quite fully developed yet. And so there are some thin sliced tasks that we just took straight out of the textbook, playing around with some things for tomorrow so that we can build into a rich understanding for everybody. So it's really nice to be able to take something that can start really, really open and then be able to develop that sequentially. And there's some good examples in the book too, but like somebody commented, Michael makes it look really easy how you can just take a question and make it much more open just with the way that you structure it. So yeah, and those resources that he shared, those links there's some really great ones. Those of us here in Saskatchewan, there are some teachers that have been compiling some tasks. I'll put that link in the chat too, because they're connected to our provincial curricular outcomes, but there are some good, a couple of good tasks. It's not an all-encompassing document. It's a work in progress, but there are a couple of good rich tasks to just help people get started. So I'll stick that in the chat as well.
All right, and I guess I'll wrap things up just by repeating that our emails are up there if anybody wants to get in touch. Be happy. Oh, Finn says hi. Be happy to continue the conversation with anybody if they'd like to start one up.
Well, thank you, you three, for being willing to share how you put the framework into practice. And kind of highlighting how some of these elements look in general for people who are new, because I know there are several people attending this for whom this framework is still quite fresh. So that background is also helpful. Thanks for attending, everyone. Like I said, the next one is scheduled for December 15th, and it's strictly about tasks. So I love the tasks element myself. So I hope you attend for that, and people will be talking about that more.
Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day or evening tonight.
I echo that. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Have a good night, folks.